Hello and welcome to the Malika Writes channel. My name is Malika Writes, and today we are going to be looking at an article by the publication Far Out, and they have an interview with the man behind Princess Monaco and Spirited Away, Miyazaki, and he has some very interesting things to say about Lord of the Rings. Now, this channel is quite obvious in its love of Lord of the Rings. I make no bones about it. I am a Lord of the Rings fan. So, reading the article, I was very interested in hearing what such an accomplished person, such an accomplished artist, has to say about the Lord of the Rings. And I agree with him on certain points about American culture. However, um, he is wrong when it comes to the Lord of the Rings, and it's not surprising. And I think um, when it comes to professionals, we often think that just because they've gotten some things right, that they get everything right. And that's obviously not the correct lens. Anybody can be wrong. It's okay to have disagreements. Even on this channel, as you've come to listen to me, I'm very open to disagreements. If you disagree, let me know. I can be wrong. There is always room for improvement. No one is ever right 100% of the time, even in their own field. So, with that being said, I just want to share some of the main points from the interview. So, he talked about the Lord of the Rings when describing his political standings. He says he's anti jeans, anti bourbon, anti burgers, anti fried chicken, anti cola, anti American coffee, anti New York, anti West Coast. And his dislike for American culture at large extends to American cinema. The the main film he chose to criticize in this particular interview is Lord of the Rings. So he says Americans shoot things and they blow up and the like, as you'd expect. They make movies about it. If someone is the enemy, it's okay to kill endless numbers of them. Lord of the Rings is like that. If it's the enemy, there's killing without separation between civilians and soldiers. That falls within collateral damage. Miyazaki compared the visual politics of large-scale Hollywood productions, such as The Lord of the Rings, to the country's international policies, attacking America's actions in Afghanistan. Miyazaki claimed that such projects are a dangerous addition to public discourse because they diminish the value of human life by weaponizing the audience through cinematic violence. Miyazaki continued, how many people are being killed in attacks in Afghanistan? The Lord of the Rings is a movie that has no problem doing that, not separating civilians from enemies, apparently. If you read the original work, you'll understand, but in reality, the ones who were being killed are Asians and Africans. Those who don't know that yet say they love fantasy are idiots. So I'm just going to address that before we move on to everything else that he said. Okay. So, in terms of the damage that is being done, what we term as collateral damage, his main point, which is there is no separation between the soldier and the civilian in the Lord of the Rings. I would have to disagree with this as someone who has read the Lord of the Rings a fair few amount of times. I would have to disagree. The first thing is that there are no civilians amongst the orcs. The orcs serve as the main enemy in The Lord of the Rings. The orcs are, according to the Silmarillion, which is the work that precedes The Lord of the Rings, the orcs are deformed, tortured, and brutalized elves who have been corrupted to the point of madness. They do not know love, they do not know sympathy, they do not know mercy or pity. These are now creatures. They were not once this way. They were corrupted by the main enemy of the Silmarillion, who was Morgoth, who used to be one of the Valar, one of the good guys. So they were corrupted, and the the creation of orcs is considered to be one of the most egregious acts by Morgoth because it is a direct sin against Eru Ilúvatar, who is the god of Tolkien's world. So, that being said, we are not dealing with a civilization. We're dealing with slaves, with elves who have been enslaved and been corrupted to the point that there is no return for them. There is no sympathizing with orcs. There is no redemption for orcs. Now, coming to, as we expand on that point, I just want to say that there is a reason why we have such a clear distinction in the Lord of the Rings, not in the Silmarillion. I'll come to that in a minute. In the Lord of the Rings, there is a reason why we have such a clear distinction between good and evil. This comes fundamentally from Tolkien's religious views. In the Christian worldview, there are things that are evil, that are viewed as corrupt. Those are demons. There is enough evidence in the text to suggest that orcs are supposed to be like demonic creatures, and therefore there is no sympathizing with them in that worldview. Even if we took out the Christian worldview from Tolkien's work, which is near impossible, but let's just do it for a second. Tolkien's work is escapism, and in the world of escapism, you can have binaries such as good and evil, and have these things at their extreme, because in escapism, you can bend the rules in such a way that, while in reality there are no clear binaries, in the Fey realm, there can be. You can impose that in your story if your story operates on the premise of escapism. So, at every angle, there is no way to fault Tolkien on this particular point. First of all, the orcs are corrupted, so there is no civilian soldier separation. They are all soldiers, they are all enslaved. Second of all, his work is escapism. So therefore, he can create those kind of binaries. And he can have those kind of absolutes where you have a whole race of creature, but there are no civilians amongst them, they are just soldiers. Third, orcs are supposed to be a representation, even though Tolkien hated allegory, so they are supposed to be in the likeness, or they are supposedly influenced by demonic creatures who have no redemption. So those 3 points cancel out the first about the separation between civilian and soldier. So let's move on to this second point, which is about the fact that having this lack of separation devalues human life. I will not pretend, and I've always made this very clear in not just my personal life but on YouTube, that I value human life, and I do find his critique of American culture to be quite substantial. Americans have in the past devalued human life. That is just the way that their country has been able to grow in such a capitalistic system. Capitalism inherently reduces human life to basically what it can be, what its market value is. That is just the ills of it. Is it the worst system on earth? No. Am I trying to make a comparison between communism and capitalism? No. I'm just saying a fact. Capitalism reduces human lives to commodities. That is just what it does. There are benefits and there are ills of that, and this is just one of the ills. So I do agree with that critique, but it is not something that can be levied against Tolkien. The reason for this is because there are no indications in Tolkien's work that he did not value human life. If we have to look at the context of Tolkien's work, which is his own life, the fact that he served in the military, this is somebody who had actual experience with war, who knew what it could do. This is one of the last people that would undervalue human life. Another thing, that I just want to say about this point before I move on to the final point I have to make in this particular section is that Faramir, one of the characters in The Lord of the Rings, who is the brother of Boromir, one of the members of the Fellowship, he gives a speech about a soldier from Harad. And in that speech, he acknowledges the humanity of somebody who is supposed to be his enemy. He acknowledges that this war is one that many of the soldiers did not want to fight. So, while it's a single speech in a very large body of work, it was deliberately put there by the author, said by a very important character, because it has weight. This is the author, it's not just a character tag for Faramir to let us know what he's like. It's also a statement by the author. For Miyazaki to ignore this, despite having claimed to have read the original work, for somebody who produced Princess Monaco and Spirited Away, stories that are very well received, this is an oversight. And this just shows that none of us are exempt from bias. Does he have a point? Yes. Did he choose the wrong work to express that point, the wrong body of work to express that point? I absolutely think so. His next point, which is, if you read the original work, you'll understand. But in reality, the ones who are being killed are Asians and Africans. Those who don't know that yet say they love fantasy are idiots. Okay, this is a point I really want to address, because in this point in time, the works of old writers are being reassessed. And in this day and age, especially with the Amazon show coming out, a lot of people are going back to Tolkien's work. We're getting a lot of theories that are being imposed onto Tolkien's work in order to properly dissect them in this in the way that modern audiences dissect things. And so, one of the accusations that has been levied against Tolkien is racism. And so, I want to use this point that Miyazaki has brought up to once and for all just put to bed this idea that Tolkien was racist. I am not afraid to call out a body of work that is racist and that has racist themes, because I've done that before on this channel, and I'm not afraid to do that, even to something I like. I did it with Tarzan. Disney's Tarzan was a favorite of mine growing up, and I was thoroughly disappointed with the first book of the original story. So I have no qualms about calling out a work that is fundamentally colonial in its approach to human lives. I cannot say the same for Tolkien. The thing is, when we look at the relationships between Gondor and Harad and the other people from the south, it's very interesting because the discrimination or the tension between the two of them has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with superiority or someone being inferior. It has everything to do with allegiance. In the Silmarillion, it says that those who came last out of the south basically fell under the illusions that Sauron and Morgoth produced. So they were corrupted in their way of thinking. They chose a particular side. This does not mean that they were underdeveloped in the way that eugenics suggests. This does not say that they were somehow inferior or they were somehow barbaric in that sense. It has nothing to do with the race of the people, because, as Tolkien himself said in the Silmarillion, all people came from the exact same place, just as the elves were all born in the exact same place. This has nothing to do with race. So to bring up Africans and Asians as a sort of allegory to Tolkien's work is inaccurate. Because when we look at the tensions in the text between the race of men, they have nothing to do with individual races, just as we have in the real world. A second thing I want to say about the race thing in Tolkien, Faramir's speech obviously gives humanity to the Harrod soldier, but I also want to say that it is not a crime in a book to have a character who is black or Asian or Arab, who is a bad character, who is a bad person. It is not a crime to have that. It is a crime to deny that character of humanity, because then you are stepping into dangerous territory. Tolkien never does that. He never says, oh, because this character has darker skin, they are somehow horrible. Those who dare to look at the orcs and think that they are somehow an allegory for black people, that is racism. That is horrendous racism. Because in all the time that I watched Lord of the Rings, never once did I see any semblance of a black person in the orcs. So I've read articles where people have suggested that the orcs are an allegory for black people. That is the most insulting thing you can ever say. And there should be absolutely no tolerance for that sort of comparison. To even think that the suggestion of a beast having sallow skin, and somehow you in your mind are able to compare that to a black person, shows that you are fundamentally racist. Not the author, but you. And so this is a point I want to bring up. I'm not accusing Miyazaki of racism, because the point he is making, the Gondorians are fighting against people from the global south in Tolkien's world. These are people from the south. And so he is also making a comparison to how America and England and the rest of Europe were oppressing people in the global south. It is a fair comparison to make. But if Miyazaki had paid attention to Tolkien's work, had bothered to do his due diligence with Tolkien's work, to give the author a chance to actually show their work in the way that they know best, which is through the story, then he would have understood that this is not an allegory, it's escapism. It is not a crime to have a brown person as your enemy. It is a crime to dehumanize them, which is something that Tolkien never does. I just want to end this with a sort of balance, because I do think that Miyazaki has a point to make about Western films. We cannot ignore the fact that a lot of our childhood classics, Indiana Jones, which Miyazaki references, do have colonial undertones. It is impossible to look at the state of our world today and to look at the stories that came out during the times that we were children and our parents were children. They have colonial undertones. It is impossible for them not to. However, it is not okay to simply use a broad brush and criticize everything that has come out of the West. If we are going to have integrity and to actually do our jobs in criticizing and in looking for the meaning and in understanding works of art and works of literature, then we have to do our due diligence. You can't use a broad stroke and just take what was popular and say, well, look at the colonial undertones here, or they were killing Africans and Asians. You can't use these triggering buzzwords in order to get a reaction and use just the very surface things to make your point, that shows a lack of integrity. Your point may be valid, as I do believe Miyazaki's point is. But if you do not do your due diligence in ensuring that the work you use to illustrate your point actually illustrates your point, then you undermine the value of your point. He has a very valid point to make. This is something that I myself have found a problem with a lot of Western works, is that they fail to give humanity to the people that they label as the enemy. However, the Lord of the Rings was the wrong one to pick. It was the absolute wrong one to pick, because no matter where you look, the films or the books, they all give humanity to their characters, regardless of race. A prime example is when we have the separation or the sundering of the elves, and they go and form different groups, and we see the we see the discrimination between them. Those who did not see the light of Valinor are treated worse. But not once does Tolkien deny their humanity. Not once does the author himself discriminate against these characters by making them inherently lesser. The characters do that. The characters are the ones who carry out these things, because that is to show their folly. He doesn't try and he doesn't try and excuse the bad actions of certain characters. He calls it out in his descriptions. He will call Thingol proud. He will call the sons of Feanor troublesome when they look down on some of the Moriquendi. So this is not the author doing something. Just because there is a discrimination or racism or sexism in your story does not make the author inherently any of these things. So I find it very disingenuous when, because of the presence of discrimination, because of the presence of racism or sexism or any other ism that you can think of, somehow this gets levied at the author as though they were supposed to write the picture-perfect story with no conflict whatsoever. And so I think, for the most part, I personally have not watched anything by Miyazaki. But I am now curious to, and I will make time to do that. But I want to hear your opinions. I really would encourage you to read the article for yourself. I would be doing a disservice to you if I did not ask you to do that, because I do think you have the right to make up your own opinion. Do you agree? Do you disagree with my point? We can always discuss this, because this channel very much is a discussion channel, and I look forward to your opinions on this. This is just my take. I have to say thank you to Scotsmeyer. He sent me this article, so thank you very much, Callum. And go and check out his video on it. Go and check out his take. So I hope you have enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching. This has been the Malika Writes channel.